radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke Radio for the masses. Yeah, man, how you doing? Today's Monday, August 5th, 2019. We are live 216 days into the new year. Just 149 days left. We're live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south. Far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planets. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? I hope you had a great weekend. Got an amazing week lined up here on the show. Tonight, very special guest, Alejandro Rojas. We just call him Alejandro. He's got one name. Of Open Minds UFO Radio TV, the website. Oh, you know what? I blew it. Before I left the house, I had my Open Minds T-shirt out. And I meant to change, and I didn't change. Oh, sorry, Alejandro. I was going to wear the T-shirt. I paid for that T-shirt, by the way. And I love that T-shirt. Anyway, all right. So tonight, Alejandro's here. He's the Director of Operations for Open Minds Production, the host of Open Minds UFO Radio right here on KGRA, editor and contributing writer for Open Minds TV, and MC for the International UFO Congress. He is also a blogger for the Huffington Post. Alejandro was also the official spokesperson for the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, as the Director of Public Education. As a UFO paranormal researcher and journalist, Alejandro has spent many hours in the field investigating anomalous phenomena up close and personal. Alejandro has been interviewed by media organizations around the world, including the largest cable and network news agencies, with regular appearances on Coast to Coast AM and, of course, Fade to Black. He has been featured on the Travel Channel, Syfy, Nat Geo, and E! His website is openminds.tv. You can click on the links over at Jimmy Church Radio. I'd like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Alejandro Rojas. Alejandro, good evening. How are you, man?
I am doing well. Thanks for having me.
Man, you sound like you do radio.
Do I really? I don't have a voice like yours. I think I have a weird voice, but you've got that radio voice.
Yeah.
We're rocking on Jimmy Church Radio.
You know, I used to, I know I've told you this before, but I used to go and just binge on your, the Open Minds videos, the interviews over the years. And I used to watch them just back to back and go, man, one day I'm going to be just like Alejandro. I'm going to be just like that guy. So there you go. Welcome back, man. How are you?
I am doing very well.
The weirdness of what is going on today and this planet is something that I really want to get into tonight, but and we will. But the weirdness of this community, you were drawn into it at some point, and did you expect this community to be as strange and as fun as it actually is before you were a member of this community?
Well, it's morphed. You know, when I got involved, especially with MUFON, there were kind of all the old guys. You know, there was Stanton and John Schuessler, who maybe did his last talk there at the MUFON Symposium this year, who's really getting up there in age, and Bob Wood and Ryan Wood, his son, some of the MUFON board members. I mean, it was very different, and the internet wasn't such a huge thing. I mean, YouTube videos were just kind of starting up, and so it was more community, and it was more kind of like these, you know, I saw you at the MUFON Symposium. It was more of that crowd and these communities. MUFON was more important back then because it wasn't, it was like the big network as opposed to the online networks. So it's really changed. And as it's changed, you know, that's when kind of the online hating kind of came. And at first, you know, it was kind of shocking. It was like, what's with this? You know, all I'm trying to do is share information, and like, you get all this hate. But as time goes on, I think we all learn whenever you put yourself out there, you're going to get the trollers. Now, you know, we've got the term troll, not that that's been around, hasn't been around a long time, but it wasn't back in the day. So, and I also saw that, you know, actually the people who are enjoying what you're doing way outnumber, like, immensely, the trollers. You just don't hear from them as much. And so, you know, it's kind of hard for people when they get out there because you see the trollers, you hear from them, and you've just kind of got to like move forward, you know, and keep getting that information out. So I eventually just began to just focus on that. There's a period of times where I do very little social media. I'm worried about researching and writing stories, and I don't have time to pay attention to the rest. And so it was kind of funny in recent times in that I was just expecting there would be a lot of hate out there. And what I started to see over time was less hate and more of a lot of, you know, cheerleading going on, which is nice. But I always, you know, brace myself whenever I write anything that I'm going to get a lot of people, you know, that are, for whatever reason, have a problem with it. Although I don't completely not like that, because actually, like, some of the skeptics or some of the very critical people out there who are negative, maybe they're just not very good at, you know, being constructive when they share information, but sometimes they have valid points, and I screwed something up, and I want to know if I screwed up because I want to correct it, and I want to make sure I do a better job in the future. So yeah, kind of a love-hate thing there, but it's definitely gotten to where people get really personal. Like in our Open Minds UFO group, you know, we don't allow personal attacks, and it's fostered this great environment where people debate. There are people in there who don't agree with anything I say, but they're great at debating, and they improve what I do when, you know, we can converse in a civil manner about these things.
Well, it's one thing to debate, and I love a good debate.
Right.
You know, that, let's go, right? And you know what? You and I can have one tonight. Let's plan that.
I'm sure we'll get there at some point.
Yeah, we'll get there at some point. But it's the other crazy part. Like, you write an article, and the headline on the article is aliens love to drink orange juice. Right? And so you write the article, aliens love to drink orange juice. And then somebody comes back with, man, orange juice, Alejandro, you shill. I can't believe you're representing the man. I can't believe, man, you just need to just fall off a bridge, man. I can't. It's like that. It's like, hey, man, how did we get here?
Yeah. When did you start working for the orange juice, you know, company conspiracies out there?
Right. The orange juice cabal, man.
The deep orange juice state.
The deep
it's
orange
like,
juice
dude,
state.
I don't even drink orange juice. It's just, you know, I found evidence that the aliens like the orange juice.
Is it because that we are our community, are we an example of actually what's just going on in this country, that we're not any different? We're not shielded by this divisiveness that is happening and the trolling that goes on across the internet, that we're just like everybody else?
I think definitely like everybody else. I dabble in politics. In fact, I've helped some candidates, and I won't even get into what side of the spectrum. Some people out there who nail me on this on a regular basis already know, and they're probably on there, in the chat saying, "Oh, I know what it is. He's one of those blah, blah, blah." But there's a lot of it there. Whatever anybody says, practically anywhere. I think there's a lot of it in science. Actually, scientists have been trolling each other since the get-go. I mean, they're nerds, and when you get nerds who are enthusiastic about something, they're not necessarily the best, at the social skills. So they're going to converse at a different level where they can get kind of mean with each other. So I think every community it happens. What my personal take on with the internet is, when you can do it anonymous, you can really kind of vent and get your anger out there. And there are a lot of people where I'll say, hey, don't attack someone, even if it's someone. Sometimes people think they're defending me and they're attacking someone, but I don't want them to attack anybody. So I'll say, hey, no personal attacks. And a lot of times people say, you know what, I just had a bad day. I'm sorry. I'll delete that post and I won't do it again. So a lot of times people just kind of got to self-check themselves. When you're anonymous and you're online, it's easier to be mean and hateful. And maybe it's just a growing thing that we're all learning how to use this new thing called the internet, and learning how to hopefully one day become more civil on it. But we'll see, I guess.
Well, that, and this is what I find very funny, is there are those out there in these different camps who know that you're going to be on the show tonight, and they are like hoping that you and I are going to go at it like they go at it. Mm-hmm. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. And I think that they would all be disappointed, from whatever side of the fence they want to come at us from, that when you and I saw each other last weekend, we had not only a great time and a great conversation, but we were discussing things out there that were pretty controversial. But you and I were just talking like humans. And had a great conversation, and couldn't wait to not only get have a conversation on the show, but to hang out once again with each other. And I think that they would be very disappointed if they knew the actual truth.
Some of them would. Luckily, there's a lot of people who, in fact, I think the majority of people, and I don't know, you would know your listeners better, but I would hope that the majority of people would actually find that would be happy about that, would be like, that's cool, that people can have different perspectives and still get along. I think the first thing we did was hug, and we haven't even seen each other since a lot of this has really gotten heated. Right. And of course we get the messages, Jimmy said this, or Jimmy had John on and they did this or whatever. And it's like, well, everybody, and I've said this about anybody who's got an opinion, everybody deserves their own opinion. That's what makes this country great. And I certainly don't disparage anybody for having their own opinion. And I know you personally, so it's not like I would believe that you're out to get me. And even if you were, and you were to attack me on the show, you know what? That's cool too, because I get attacked on these shows occasionally. When you get on, people really come at you. Well, what about this? What about that? And that's fine. I'm ready to throw down.
Yeah, let's throw down. And see, this is, and I've said this for years. The one thing about, and that's before all of this other stuff that has surfaced in the last year and a half. I have always stated that this community is like the barbershop. This is the place where we are supposed to be able to get together and speak about anything. Our opinions and everything else is allowed to go on the table, and everybody is here to listen. And that's the beauty of it. And the day that stops because people want to censor or say that this person's wrong, or, and get angry, that's not what the UFO community is about, and it's never been. And it's what drew me to this community, was the openness of it. Because before I got involved in the UFO community, before my first MUFON meeting, I was in the closet, Alejandro. You know, I wasn't out there talking about this kind of stuff. I used to hide my UFO videos in my home and my UFO books. If I had company over, I didn't want.
Me too. I hear you.
Yeah. And once I got involved in the UFO community, I was able to talk about all of this stuff because everybody else was. I had that freedom and I was able to emotionally open up about things that I wouldn't do before. Is that what drew you to the community?
No, I think what drew me, I wasn't drawn to the community. I was drawn to the subject and the research more than anything, I think. But I think I also had some good mentors to begin with. I mean, being able to participate, not that everybody was like this, but, with the headquarters of MUFON, because I grew up in Denver and Lakewood, where headquarters was for many, many years. But also Stanton, especially with his passing, it really, at this moment, it really makes me reflect on him being the perfect example of what we're talking about. He loved to debate. If someone had a different perspective, he loved to debate, and he didn't hate them. I don't think he ever, he almost spoke about Phil Klass, for example. It was, I think, wasn't the most ethical debater. I guess I'll put it that way. But Stanton, never really talked bad about him. Seth Shostak, who I believe is more of an ethical, but Stanton loves to debate him and has no problem with him. And even when after years, and finally I had done some research where I'm like, you know what? I'm finding myself disagreeing completely with Stan's perspective on this. And when I shared that with him, the first thing he wanted to do, let's debate it. When can I be on your show? Let's talk about it. He loved to debate. And we did debate. Jeremy Corbell debated him at the UFO Congress. And some people criticized me and said, why did you let Jeremy attack Stanton like that? And I was like, Stanton was having a good time. And when we were done, he had fun. He got excited about that sort of thing, and he didn't hold grudges. And I think he's a perfect example of how this community should be. And I guess what I felt it was when I entered, at least with Stanton as an example. So, and a lot of people can do that. And a lot of people do that. And I think that's what's positive. We got to learn not to take things personal. When someone disagrees with us, there's no problem with that. All of my best friends in this field, I do not, none of us agree 100% on everything. All of my best friends in the world, none of us agree 100% on politics. That's just the way life is, but we still love each other, and that's the way. We don't need to take it personal when someone disagrees with us.
And the fascinating thing, Alejandro, is that right now, like today, nobody really knows nothing. Right? We don't know. We don't. Right?
It's a great point, and it's one of the things I love when I debate. That's what's great about debating is that typically you learn. You learn something. And I always tell people I could be 100% wrong. This is how I've put things together. This is my perspective. But, especially whenever we figure out what the some of the truths are about some of what's going on behind some of what our interests are, there no doubt will be some of the people who we thought were totally way off base are going to turn out to be right.
I know.
None of us know for sure.
I know. And I've said this quote so many times now, but it's worth it. A couple of years ago, Giorgio was on the show, and he said these words, and I've repeated it ever since. He goes, "You know what, Jimmy? When that flying saucer lands and ET steps off and starts talking to us, we're going to find out none of us were correct."
Yeah, I think he's right.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the one thing. So with this, unless somebody's got an autographed, embroidered Zeta Reticuli tour jacket, right? Unless you got that, unless you came back with one of those, nobody's an expert here. We've all got our experiences. When before you joined MUFON and came into this community, did you have a sighting? Was there something that?
No, I was different. Most people have had a sighting that came into this, but actually, John Schuessler hasn't. I don't believe. And some of you might not know who he was, but he was one of the founders of MUFON. He actually worked for NASA. He was a contractor, but he would have brown bag lunches once in a while to talk about UFOs at like Johnson Space Center. But great guy. He ran MUFON for a period of time. And when I joined MUFON, he was running it. But, where was I headed with that? What was your question?
Did you have a sighting?
Oh, yeah. He hadn't had a sighting. I don't think he ever had a sighting. I don't think Stanton ever had a sighting. So I'm kind of in that group. I didn't have a sighting. It was just my curiosity, my scientific curiosity. I was really into math and science. I was a rocket science, went into school to be an engineer, an aerospace engineer. So rocket science is what I wanted to do. But then I quickly turned to journalism. And then I also, because of my Native American and Mexican background, which is kind of more open to kind of the paranormal, I had an interest, although skeptical. So those were kind of what were my motivations were. I just found it really interesting. And the more I found out was that, the more this was a big story that wasn't being covered well. There was a lot of news here that wasn't getting to the mainstream or being covered. And that's what my motivation was. It wasn't until many years after that I had a sighting, and I've only had maybe 2 or 3, and they're not that interesting, really. I'd love to have better ones. So no, it wasn't a sighting that really drove me.
You just mentioned we're going to be heading towards a break in a second. You've had some sightings, and you've also gone out and done an awful lot of research on the subject. Mm-hmm. What would it take for you for a sighting? I'm not talking about something landing in your front yard, but what would it take for you with a sighting to go, okay, that ain't us. That's something that I can't explain. That's not advanced military stuff. That is something else. What would it take for you to make that statement?
I don't know. That would be a really tough one. I don't know. I guess something would have to land, and then something would have to come out for me to go that far. I mean, it would have to be very definitive for me because, when it comes to technology, let's take any major, let's say, black project. We didn't know about it till many years after it was already flying, especially when it comes to spy planes. And so we can't rule those things out all of the, very easily, just by, I would say, maneuverability or the technical characteristics of the craft. So not 100%, I would say, at least. So yeah, it would take something like, landing and the guys coming out and saying, hey, here's your, I heard you were into, you wanted a Zeta Reticuli tour jacket, and
right.
We've got them for sale here.
Well, see, we, and I'm talking about you and I, we have acquired a lot of knowledge from interviews. I have done way north of 1,000. You're in the same boat that I am. And so when you do that type of conversation over and over again, you're also learning. So let me ask you about what you've learned. What is your stance on ET visiting this planet in the distant past at least one time?
I would say personally, I don't know. I would say I personally cannot say for sure that has happened. I would say there's a lot of mystery out there. And, when it comes to science, which is something else I cover, for Den of Geek, and I've covered it for Huffington Post and others. I've interviewed astronauts and scientists of many types. And what's interesting about science, especially space science, is the answers typically turn out to be something we never could have imagined, something that scientists never even thought of to speculate about. This happens over and over and over and over again. So when we get the answer to dark matter, what it is, or even if it exists, or why we even think, because there's certain, observation as to why we suspect there is such a thing. But it could be due to something completely different than what we think it is. And it most likely will be. So at this point, I don't even like to venture without information as to, what it might be, because we just don't know. There's so many different possibilities. I think this is kind of the perspective that Vallée and Hynek brought. And I understand it a lot better now because, there are so many possibilities. We don't know what we don't know, essentially. So, I don't know for sure. I think there are definitely mysteries that we don't know how certain things happened in the past. I think, Giorgio and Childress on Ancient Aliens bring up a lot of great cases where, what the heck is that? How the heck did that happen? I don't know that I would go so far as Giorgio and say it's aliens, but it could be some sort of technology that's lost to the ages. I think it could be a number of things that we just haven't discovered yet. So that's what's wonderful about our world. There's a lot of mystery and there's a lot to discover.
What about today?
Mm-hmm.
What about
if they're
today?
Here now?
Are we being visited today?
I would again say I don't know. I'm not sure. I would say these technologies, these aircraft that we're observing could be something else. It could be something from the future, could be something, even abductions could be something from the future. Abductions could be a number of things. John Mack didn't even think they were physical, for example, who is famous for, looking into the topic. So, yeah, I would say unless we know definitively, I can't say for sure that I know. The questions are still open. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable. They want to know. They want to say, nope, it's this, it's that. And they're not comfortable with not knowing. But, and you do have to get comfortable to say, I don't know.
What do we do? We're going to pick this up when we come back. What do we do as a community, as a society? What do we do with all of the UFO headlines that we've been dealing with for the last year and a half? It certainly seems that the media is comfortable in talking about the subject, which means so many now that haven't thought about it before believe that UFOs are real and are visiting this planet. And that's the effect of mass media, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're right. And I think that we have to teach them. I think it's an education process especially for those of us who know. And we have to be very adamant and staunch. We've got to stand for our position. So, for instance, when this Navy stuff comes out, a lot of people, not that anybody in the Navy said it was aliens, but the headlines say aliens and the interviewers say aliens. And, it's something that, when people are being interviewed, they've got to say, I never said aliens. And they've really got to correct people and say, I didn't say that. What I said is we have a genuine mystery here that we need to figure out. Nobody knows what this is. We do not have this technology. So whose is it? We don't know. And I think that's an example where we have to really start educating the mainstream and the media so they can start to understand this better. And I wrote a story recently, actually, for the Roswell Daily Record, and I put it in my blog where, the media is starting to now say, well, are these Chinese or Russian?
Yep.
And a lot of UFO people are like, oh, man, what the heck? Why are they saying that? Well, that's a good thing, actually, because now they're starting to see that, hey, there is something here. What is it? Whose is it? And at least when they begin the process to start to look at the Russian or Chinese possibility, they'll probably come to the same conclusion that many of us have, which is no, it's not their technology either. And so then they move to the next step of, whoa, we have something really mysterious here.
When we come back, we're going to continue this conversation right where we're leaving off, because when I have pointed out a couple of times on the air that, UFOs and alien is something that is left out of the conversation when it comes to, to like Harry Reid or anybody else that is taken an official stance here. And then I get bombarded back in social media and email going, no, man, that's all they talk about is UFOs and aliens. They've stated it here and here. And I'm just like, people want to hear and read what they want to hear and read. And not Harry Reid, but Reed. We'll pick this up when we come back. Our guest tonight is Alejandro Rojas. UFO Minds UFO Radio right here on KGRA. Of course, the website is ufominds.tv. The link is over at jimmychurchradio.com. We'll be right back. More with Alejandro right after this short break. Stay with us. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow Alejandro at Open Minds TV on Twitter. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. We're going to go through 4,000 tweets tonight during the show. So come over and join the conversation right there. We have 2 chat rooms open, one over at Spreaker, one over at KGRA The Planet. Our guest tonight, Alejandro Rojas. Alejandro, let me throw a hypothetical out there.
You're right.
Okay, here we go. This is the hypothetical. Open Minds TV, it's 8 staff members. 4 are ex-CIA and 4 are counterintelligence Pentagon agents, X. Could you imagine what you would have to deal with on a daily basis with people questioning your information?
Well, of course, we can see that today, right here and right now. However, to me, that sort of team is extremely exciting because, you know, the UFO community is already there. They already realize that this is a serious issue, that there's a mystery here that needs solving, that people need to be educated on this. They're already there. So, of course, they're going to have some issues. They're going to, and you know what, I use this term, especially when it comes online, the UFO community is best at eating its own. I mean, we always beat up and destroy each other, unfortunately, in that community. So no matter what you do, you can expect a lot of heat. But what's great about that configuration that you just talked about is that it's going to have a larger impact in places that we need to get into: mainstream media, mainstream science, and some networking and connections inside of the military and inside of Washington. And that's what you're going to be able to get with a team that you're talking about. And then you're going to be able to make some amazing strides, I think. And that's why I would see, because when I'm writing or even when I'm doing a show, I'm thinking that my listeners, they don't know anything about UFOs. Maybe they're skeptical and they're like, what is this UFO thing? I'm going to dip my toe in here and see what the heck's going on here. And that's who I'm speaking to when I'm writing or I'm doing the show. And having a team like that behind me is going to make me even more effective at getting to those people. And that's why that gets me really excited, because that's who I'm talking to. I'm trying to get to and to demonstrate the serious nature and the abundance of information out there that brings credibility to this issue, and trying to break that kind of giggle factor. And so that's what's so exciting in that scenario. Except
you didn't answer the question. I agree.
Oh, okay.
I agree with what you just said, though.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
I'll expect heat. There's no doubt about it. You're going to get heat, and you're going to get, the most amount of heat you could probably get, because you're talking about intelligence people. And so, these are two. But I mean, here's one of the things that really disappoints me about the conspiratorial nature of all of this is that, those of you who were in the armed forces or in law enforcement. I mean, why did you do what you did? You put your life on the line to protect the rest of us. That's why people join these organizations. That's why people go do these sort of things. And we demonize these people often with suspicion and speculation and not hard facts, figuring that there's a lot of what would actually be illegal and counterintelligence programs being used against the American public. No doubt, certainly that has happened. We do know there have been cases, but that's not what they're doing day by day, night by night. They are tracking terrorists. They are tracking bad guys. They're keeping you safe. And I know a lot of people say, oh, that's bullcrap, but here's how you find out what they're doing. You go interview people. You go get into these agencies. You figure out what they're doing. I mean, that's the thing with journalism is are much more complicated than just the black and white kind of way people see things. And you got to roll up your shirt sleeves and get in there, start digging and to figure out really the mechanics and the nuances behind things.
Well, okay. And since this community is so acclimated to fighting the man and trying to get to this information, and been ridiculed for so long and laughed at. You said it yourself, the laugh factor.
True.
That,
definitely.
The defense mechanisms are always up, and they are very used to disappointment in this community. And now suddenly the man is coming out going, we're your friend now. Okay, we're all ex-CIA, we're all ex-counterintelligence, we're all, security clearances and oaths, and we've got all of now. Just trust us. And this community is not necessarily going to jump in feet first. They tried to with the New York Times and the day of disclosure, December of 2017. Those were exciting times, but you can't blame this community for stepping back a couple of steps and not going all in, can you?
I would never blame anybody for skepticism because skepticism is healthy, but that's not what the community always does. Parts of the community do that. In fact, a lot of my friends who are very serious researchers were very skeptical from the get-go. And I don't blame people for that at all. Think that that's healthy and wise. Until you're able to gather more information, you've got to be on your toes. And I think, we always have to be, because you never know where there might be tricks being played or something fishy going on. So you always have to be aware. I mean, I do live by the trust no one, Fox Mulder kind of motto at some level. But at the same time, you also have to make progress. You got to do research. You've got to get in there. You've got to build relationships. I think that, for instance, I'm here talking with you where some people thought, oh, Jimmy and Alejandro, they must hate each other. But,
right.
Building relationships is really important. Having open lines of communications, even and especially with those who you are suspicious of or don't agree with, because you're not always going to be right, like we talked about earlier, and you're going to need those lines of relationships with people who were right, and or you're going to need insight into, if you want to be ahead of the game, how things went awry. Maybe you'll be able to identify, hey, this is fishy over here, I'm going to keep an eye on this, and then you turn out to be right. You're ahead of the game because you already knew some of these problems that were existing before and you've kept an eye on it. So, yeah, you always have to be on your toes, I think. I totally agree with that. But concepts like the man, who is the man? There is no man. There are millions of individuals working desperate jobs, working with different motives, different agencies. It's extremely complicated then to say the man. And this scenario, when you're talking about X, I would say these aren't the man. These are something other than the man. In fact, these are, in some cases, let's take John Alexander, for example, who's part of the mechanism, who is saying, well, I want to know who the man is, even though to the novice, to the layman outside of the system would say, well, you are the man. And he's thinking, I'm not the man. I'm looking for who the man is. It's much more complicated than just to say, everybody's part of some man. The man organization.
Right. And the view of many out there, which is the viewpoint right now, the opinion that is out there expressed in the media, and that is coming from TTSA and their PR machine, and coming back into the media, is only going to be from a view that is theirs. An opinion that is theirs, one that has always been tainted in the past. And that is... Who
is theirs?
Well, but you understand what I'm saying. That's the argument that is out there.
I don't at all, actually. I'm trying to understand. So, for instance, when you say TTSA and their PR mechanism, they don't really have a PR mechanism. They have one person who kind of does different jobs to try to get information out. There's very few people trying to wear many hats, trying their best to share, and the media certainly not being on board with that at all. The media being a completely separate entity that has not been aligned with the message, I would say, of what is being. Now, I would say the New York Times was pretty well aligned, but that's one of a rare instance. And that's mostly because Leslie Kean had a very long relationship with some of the individuals that were part of all this. I wouldn't even say George Knapp is aligned with TTSA. He does his own work, even though he has a really long relationship with many of the people. But George Knapp is very independent. They certainly, although there is a perception out there, I can say this, being in regular contact with all of the parties involved, especially George, that, the lines of inquiry that he has pursued, and this is what's frustrating because he deserves a lot of credit. He has developed those on his own. Leslie Kean developed sources on her own. And they were able to pursue and get more information out than they were given from TTSA. There's a lot. If we were left just to what TTSA would share with us, we would probably only have half the story max, especially without the input of Leslie and George.
Well,
their independent research and work.
Yeah. Okay. Putting those two aside, what the question was, though, that what has been laid out there in the community, that what is coming from TTSA, from the group, the statements, when I say mass media, the news organizations, and what is tied to their PR company. I'll give you the name of the PR company here in a second. With all of that no matter what, it is from their side, and we look at the list of employees, and it has to be tainted. It is their story, their version of events, and that is the concern that is out there. And so what is your response to that? Could it be tainted? Could it be from one side or not? Like the use of the word threat. That is out there.
I guess I still don't get it, because there's the message, certainly the message that To the Stars is putting out there is their own, but that's intuitive. That would be obvious because it's their message, it's their voice, and they're sharing. the information that is being shared with the media is by no means to the star's voice. I would, besides, especially if you're putting like Leslie and George aside, I don't know who you would be referring to that is parroting what To the Stars is saying, because they're not. Let's take CNN, for example. They're throwing in terms like alien. They're getting, not all of the points, right. They are interviewing Navy pilots, and certainly they're interfacing and making queries to the Navy outside of To the Stars. They are at times, questioning some of the information, or even, identifying in some cases what they see as discrepancies. But there's certainly, I think, a hefty amount of skepticism coming from most of the media. Tucker Carlson with Fox News is definitely highly interested in what all of these guys have to say, but he's not just interviewing To the Stars. He's also talking to Nick Pope quite a bit, and the pilots themselves. So those are three different perspectives that are being shared. So I don't see personally that, if that's where you're getting at, and that's what I think that you're saying, is that the media is parroting, what To the Stars is saying, and I don't see that at all.
Yeah, and the community out there, and certainly to those that will be posting in Twitter about this conversation tomorrow, right, or tonight, are going to say the exact opposite.
Well, I'll disagree with you there in that some of them will.
No, well, hold on. Let me finish my thought, though.
Okay, go ahead.
They will say the exact opposite. They will say that it is because of To the Stars and their PR that To the Stars brought the Navy pilots out. To the Stars brought the videos out. To the Stars did the Elizondo, the briefings to the Senate. To the Stars exposed to Tucker Carlson, who took it to President Trump. It's all because of To the Stars. Everything has happened today. And so it's the exact opposite of what you're saying right now. And that's the way that they will always argue their point about To the Stars' influence, which seems to be everything. Because of today, what has happened is because of To the Stars and Chris Mellon and Elizondo and Justice and on and on and on. So that's not me. That's the community speaking.
That's some in the community speaking. Certainly not even close to all the community. And of course, we have different communities. I have my followers who I see some of what they're saying. And from my perspective, I would say the majority are not saying that. And of course, from your perspective, you would see that the majority are. So it's probably somewhere in between. And they can battle that all they want. But when it comes back to the actual origins of the information, you're right. TTSA has been the one to tip everyone off, especially Lou Elizondo, because we do know, at least I could say I know, Chris Mellon was aware of Elizondo. Certainly all of Bigelow Aerospace was aware of ATIP and OSAP, the two Pentagon programs looking into this stuff, because they were contractors for those programs. So people that were in the know in the Bigelow organization, for example, we talked about John Alexander, who worked with Bigelow. He wasn't in the know, so some weren't. And of course, with MUFON, we weren't aware when we were working with Bigelow back in the past. We didn't know that relationship was likely also involved, OSAP and ATIP. But when you're talking about like the pilots have to get permission from the Navy press office before they can come out. So the Navy's the one who's going to sanction the active pilots, such as the related to the newer case, the 2015 Florida case, the Roosevelt. Those they're going to get their directives or they're from the Navy about what they could talk about and what they can't talk about. That's the way that works. But just because To the Stars is tipping people off that these organizations exist doesn't mean that they're the ones who are going to be providing all of the information. And I think this is one of the misconceptions that happens. And it, to be honest, is just from, it's like I said earlier, the case is usually much more complicated than people expect. So, for instance, when Leslie Kean is aware of the story and she gets some information, she goes to Ralph Blumenthal, who she knows is a New York Times writer who is into this topic. And they finally are able to sell the story to the New York Times, who also gives them their top Pentagon reporter. Then they have to begin digging to get a story. You certainly don't want to use one source for everything, and they did not. We know this from the writers, and that's not how the New York Times works. They are skeptical. They're going to say, okay, Lou, sure you did this Pentagon program, but we need to verify that. So then they go to their sources and they vet all of this information, and we're even able to get more sources that were outside of To the Stars and Elizondo. In fact, I know, and this is from interviews that I've done with all of these individuals, mostly online, they were not aware that the New York Times was going to release both of those videos or even get those videos. So I'm not even, from my understanding at this point, they don't even know how the New York Times got those, and they were not prepared for it. If you notice, the New York Times came out first with those 2 videos. To the Stars then later posted their 3, and they, from what I understand, weren't even prepared to post those videos at the time the New York Times article came out.
That's
so
interesting.
There are different sources here.
Well, are you suggesting then that To the Stars had nothing to do with the Navy pilots coming forward or the videos being released, that had nothing to do with To the Stars? That the New York Times did it on their own?
Being displayed to the public, yes. To the Stars, we know that the DOD released the videos. I think that we can definitely, I guess we'd have to say speculate, because we can't say that it's on the record that Elizondo was the guy who made those videos come out. But I would speculate and say most likely that is the case, that, he's the one who identified those and tried to get those out and was successful getting the Navy's permission. As we've seen from the DD 1910 form, and then those videos being then accessible to the public. But they were not the first to release those videos. Of course, one of those videos was leaked early on in 2007. We still do not know who leaked that video.
That's right.
And then the New York Times was the first to put out those 2 other videos. So the New York Times was the first to share those videos with the public, not To the Stars. To the Stars was the first to show the 3rd video, and so they're only responsible for publicizing, getting out to the public the 1 video as far as that goes.
We've got to head towards a break here, but
okay.
When Chris Mellon's website had the photographs of the DVDs, right, and that went out, you're saying that Chris Mellon didn't supply the New York Times with the videos that he already had in his possession?
Yes, according to Leslie Kean, the To the Stars was not the source for those videos. They got those videos from a separate DOD source.
Interesting.
And I've also confirmed this with people in To the Stars. Is that true? Did you not even know they had the videos? And they said, yes, we didn't know they had those. We were not prepared to share those videos with the public when the New York Times did it. So the New York Times pushed their hand. And this is a great example. The New York Times released more information than they were prepared to have released. Because they did their due diligence and they did their job and they did their digging and came up with information.
So it
to
was
share.
just, I've got to take a break right here, but so it was just a coincidence that Leslie Kane got the same videos.
Oh, it's not a coincidence at all. So the process is these videos are approved. These videos, which I think likely Elizondo, found and identified and got the Navy to approve that they are able to be released to the public. They got those videos. They were out there. We know from several researchers who have contacted the Navy, Tic Tacs was a known term for this UFO type, that it was known inside the Navy that people had seen these Tic Tac UFOs. We know this from Tyler Rogaway. We know this from Robert Powell. I think John Greenwald has even said something similar where they were like, yeah, the Tic Tacs, we know what that is. And we know from the Tyler Rogaway article from The Drive that the Nimitz wasn't the only ones who saw this Tic Tac. This Tic Tac has been seen across several different squadrons and pilots over the years. So that was a known thing. So whoever the New York Times talked to was aware of these videos, obviously. And these are the only videos we know of that are purported to be UFOs that are available. So whoever they talked to knew they were available, knew how to get a hold of them, knew that they were able to be released, or maybe didn't, but didn't care, and provided those videos to them.
Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, Alejandro Rojas. UFOminds.tv is the website. The links are, there's also AlejandroRojas.com. The links are over at JimmyChurchRadio.com. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Alejandro Rojas. Over the weekend, someone posted up in Twitter, Doug Aldridge playing this song, Flavor Phrase. And it's a great video. I posted it up there on Twitter, and you guys have got to go check that out. We, so familiar with the bumper music here, but to see Doug playing that in front of a live audience is pretty cool. Alejandro, I asked you earlier what it would take for you to accept that ET is here, right? And you said it probably would have to land on my front lawn and somebody step off and say, we are here. And I totally get that. These three videos that have been so widely distributed and viewed now, does that change your mind? No. And the videos and pictures are of limited use typically. And with those videos, for example, I don't have the expertise to determine, whether or not what is happening in those videos is something that is extraordinary. So I have to go with expert opinion. That's one thing we have lacking. Is we don't have, so allegedly these videos have been analyzed and determined to be something, anomalous, but we haven't seen any of that analysis, nor do we even know who did that analysis. And so that's something I hope comes forward sometime in the future. Now, in McMinnville, Oregon, David Fravor, the wing commander who chased the Tic Tac, he did a little bit of analysis and explained some of the technicalities and why what we're seeing there is not what some of the skeptics believe them to be. And he made a lot of sense. I think he's one of the top expert opinions that we've heard from thus far. So, of course, he's an expert witness in what he says occurred as well.
So a lot of these cases, and that's why military cases are so good, they rely on, expert witnesses as opposed to just, the average Joe out there, people who, are very familiar with our bleeding edge technology and what it's capable of and why, our technology maneuvers and is capable of doing what it does. So I've got to rely on expert opinion. So the videos, I think, are of very little value. I think there's not a whole lot of data the average Joe can take from that, and we haven't gotten enough supporting information to even prove those videos are something, extraordinary. In fact, until we see some of that, I am open to the idea that possibly, they are something more mundane. It's just so far from what I've seen, or at least from what I've heard, I think our best expert witness, which would be, I think, Fravor at this point, has said and believes them to be something anomalous. So what, though, he's not sure.
Sure.
Now, it's interesting what he says, by the way, if you don't mind me.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to rudely interrupt you. So
that's
you
okay.
first. You first.
You're the host. You gotta guide us. But I think it's just interesting that he says, at the very beginning, he thought that it could be Russian or Chinese. But what has convinced him that they are not Russian or Chinese is that, the technology has not come out. He has gotten no inkling that we have the sort of technology that he witnessed in 2004. And he feels that now that, 15 years have gone by, he definitely would have caught wind of that sort of technology, but that he has not is what convinces him the most.
With your reference to the average Joe, you're far removed from the average Joe. You've seen lots of video, lots of imagery. You've interviewed. You've been writing about this topic for a very long time. I want you personally, when you first saw the gimbal, let's go with the gimbal first. Mm-hmm. The first time you saw the gimbal, what went through your mind? What did you think?
Well, I'll tell you, with all of them, I wasn't that impressed. I was like, I don't know enough to know if this is and I had a little bit of practice. The best training I had as looking at that sort of video was the analysis done by the Scientific Coalition for UAPs, now is what they're called. They did this analysis of this infrared video taken by Homeland Security in Aguadilla in 2009, Puerto Rico. And that was a very good video. I thought that was actually more impressive than probably all three of these videos. And there was a lot of debate on there. And at least I feel, because we've had, and I've written on this, where do the experts lie? Most of the expert opinion we have on that video, I feel, and I've got an article to justify this, is on the edge of that what they saw there was anomalous. And so at least there I had a little bit of practice on IR, what its capabilities are, the movement of the aircraft and how that would affect the perspective of the camera. But I actually had an expert witness who is an IR expert who literally takes those sort of cameras apart and puts them back together. And he, was able to also shed a lot of light on that. On these newer ones, we've got the word of, Elizondo that this analysis has been done, but we still have to see that analysis. So I wouldn't say I was underwhelmed. I was excited in not what I was seeing, but I was excited that this was a piece of evidence that supposedly, experts believed was anomalous. And that's the part that I was most excited about, if that makes sense.
Well, again, did you say not enough, to yourself, or did you blow it off? When I first saw the gimbal footage, I was blown away. I mean, I was okay. Well, I was. Mm-hmm. And there were certain members of this community, researchers of note, that came at me really, really, really hard. That this is absolutely a nothing burger. And I went back and I defended the position of the gimbal. Today, when I look at it, it feels like this is just me. This is my opinion, but it feels like the spinning that is going on there is us. I think it's the camera spinning. I think it's the gimbal spinning. I don't think that the craft itself is spinning. I did originally. I thought, man, that's a crazy rotation. That doesn't look like an aircraft. That, you know. But today, my feeling is that rotation is the aircraft itself that is shooting the video and its equipment.
This is why it's exciting. David Fravor, I would go listen to him in McMinnville because he explains why that is not the case and why the aerodynamics just do not work, and nor do the visuals of what's happening there. And he describes very clearly why it is certainly anomalous and strange, and it shouldn't be doing what it's doing. And he makes a lot of sense when he describes that. And I would reference him. But I guess I would say it this way, in that I have seen much more convincing and exciting video that has turned out to be mundane. And that is why when I see videos, I reserve my judgment, mostly because I know my friend, let's say Mark D'Antonio, who's good at this, or others are going to burst my bubble like they have many times if I get too excited about it. I'm currently excited about the gimbal and about the Aguadilla videos because I think the experts make a lot of sense, and the more of the those with the higher levels of expertise have been able to explain why it is anomalous, such as David Fravor, if you get into, his explanation, speaking to those points that you just made. So,
the Aguadilla video, and I've watched that video 100 times, if not more. You can clearly see its speed. You can see it traveling up the runway, and that's not the closer for me, though. The closer is when it goes into the water and comes back out. That you can see its motion, you can see it moving, and when it does that, that's when I have to back up and go, okay, now that was strange.
Well, I gotta say, a lot of the skeptics and debunkers who debunk the Aguadilla video are applying their and I don't mean this in a bad way. They're applying their kind of amateur, work to these other videos. And I don't think you could do that. I don't think we can be definitive about these videos until we see this other analysis that's out there, because you have to counter that. You have to say, so for instance, why I wrote these pieces was like, okay, if you're going to explain these away, then you have to answer the experts. You have to be able to counter the expert opinions and their descriptions of why they're describing this is the case. You've got to counter that. And most of the time these guys don't. They're, this is, I already proved it. You haven't until you can counter that. And as a journalist, I've got to go with the highest expert opinion, especially if you have more than one. Because I'm not the expert, and I've got to take myself out of it because I have to use the expert opinion because I don't have expertise. I've never flown a jet fighter and I've never used, IR cameras, especially high tech like that. So I wouldn't know, but certainly the pilots and the, what do they call them? I forget, the Wizzos that are flying those jets have done it for many, many hours, and they are experts.
Now, what about the complete videos? We're only looking at seconds worth of video here. What about what was shot before and what was shot after, and why is that not released? Why not show the whole video?
Well, we're lucky to have anything at all with these videos. In fact, Aguadilla was leaked. I think that the witnesses thought it was okay to leak it, but the DOD or the Homeland Security has said, no, those were not supposed to be leaked. They told us to our buddy there, Devoid, blog out of I forget, Billy Cox, But essentially, they didn't want those released. And these videos were allowed to be released, and they're so short because they're very, methods and procedures. And there's a lot of top secret stuff on those planes, how the planes operate, the procedures and the way they do what they do. All of this is top secret. When they're doing their training exercises, they are they're following procedures they don't want the enemy to know, because they don't want the enemy to know what they're up to. So that's why we've got very little of the video. That's the way that it's been described with me. I've seen this in the past, so it makes sense. Somehow, I guess what happened before and after was something that somebody said, no, we can't allow that go out to the public. There's too much information. There's something in that shot that we just can't let the public or our enemy see.
Like, what would that be? Certainly,
I think
Alejandro,
it would be verbiage. Anything from verbiage
take
to
the verbiage
it could
out.
Take
the verbiage out. Just show us the video.
Well, then it could be some sort of maneuver. It could be some sort of craft. It could be some sort of interaction between them and maybe their EWAC, their radar ship that's up there. I mean, again, this is one of those situations where we don't know what we don't know. And certainly it could be that they're being overly sensitive, that what comes before and after is not that important to keep secret. And I think there's no one who would disagree that our military has a problem with over secrecy. So I think, we're lucky we got anything. And and that's part of the problem. We've gotten so little that we really need to see the rest of that. And it kind of gets back to your other question, because the way it's been described, and I think the way we've seen this play out, and more importantly, is that these guys have said, look, we were able to share a little bit of information, but that's it. So now what we're trying to do is grease the wheels. We're trying to go to, our colleagues. We're going to military leadership. We're going to lawmakers, and we're saying, hey, you're sitting on information that the public should see and needs to see, and you need to share that information. And it's okay to share that information because our pilots are seeing this. This is credible stuff. It's time for this stuff to come out. And certainly we've seen then headway being made. We've seen the Navy kind of coming on board and saying, okay, we're going to participate in getting out more information and making this topic more credible. We've seen an abundance now. Every week for the last few weeks, we've seen a new senator or lawmaker come out and say, hey, I was in a committee where we talked about UFOs, and it is an important topic, and we need to know more. So we are seeing that happen. And we're seeing not just interviews with the president, but obviously, even before the president was asked the question, have you been briefed on this? He was briefed on it, even though he said it was a short meeting, but at least they brought up the topic to him. So this wheel greasing has obviously been very effective.
Do you believe that our government, any branch, any agency, anything in Washington, D.C., knows definitively the truth about UFOs and ET and contact and visitations on this planet?
I would say no. I think that the more I've looked into and been involved with all of this, the more I was skeptical of that perspective. It's sort of the perspective that John Alexander has pushed forward, because he, like I said before, he looked for the man and couldn't find the man. And it seemed to fit even when you interview the military, or where you see that report with the Nimitz. When these pilots got back to the aircraft carrier, they were made fun of. There were people wearing tinfoil hats, and that report was very clear about the attitude of the jokey attitude and people being made fun of. And I've heard over and over again, talking to military witnesses, I never reported that up because I didn't want to be made fun of. I knew one radar operator who worked the DEW line back in the 60s. This is a line where we're watching the Russians were out there, and they tweaked their radars and they were seeing UFOs. His last name was Carter. So whenever they had some anomalous thing zip by that was at a high altitude, they would call up Carter and say, "Hey, we got Carter's contact. Check our radar to make sure it's functioning properly." And they would report that. And they did get a lot of heck. A lot of people came to look at it. And this guy asked some of the other radar operators on the other ships, "Aren't you getting these things too?" And they said, "Yeah, but we're not telling anybody. We're not going to go through that crap." And you hear this sort of thing over and over and over again, that people are not reporting them because of they're not treated well. You read this in Ruppelt's book, how that was a problem with Project Blue Book. He was going out to scientists and others, and they were telling him these incredible UFO stories, and he would say, "Well, why haven't you reported them to us?" And they said, "Because you guys don't take them seriously. In the last few years, all you do is debunk our stories. Why the hell are we going to share them with you?" So I think that they most likely, of course, I don't know for sure, I could be wrong, they most likely don't have the full story. They're probably a few steps ahead of us, that's for sure. But
why not say it then?
Because why do you want to say it? I wouldn't say it if I were them. "Oh, we've got these things flying around. It's our job to protect the airspace, but we can't. So good luck, everybody."
No, that's not what I'm saying. Oh, I would love for them to say that. No, what I'm saying is...
Oh, me too. But it's not in their nature.
What I'm saying is, if they don't have anything about ETs visiting Earth and UFOs, why not come out and say that? ET has never been here. There is nothing. They've never, ever said that.
They have. They certainly have. In fact, when Steve Bassett was able to get enough signatures on the We the People, petition to have that question asked of the White House, the scientific advisor to the president came out and wrote a statement saying exactly that. We do not have any evidence of aliens visiting us, and unfortunately, we don't have evidence of intelligent civilizations existing at all, even though, there's a consensus among scientists that they're probably out there somewhere. That was kind of the gist of the message.
Yeah.
But they have said that.
Right.
But I would also argue, though, that this is something that really got me into this topic, is that the public isn't aware that there has never been an overall consensus about this. That, at the end of Project Sign, the first Air Force study, they came up with a paper that said, UFOs are a real phenomena. Some of them could be extraterrestrial. And that was debatable. That was some people got upset. And all of a sudden, there was that sort of perspective was completely quashed. So, and I think there have been a large contingency of people in not only our government, but other governments who do believe there's something to this and do want more public information. I believe that that's who Lou Elizondo was. That's who Chris Mellon was. That's who most of these people were that are now part of To the Stars. And even with MUFON, people like John Schuessler and others. There are people who were working on government projects who were pushing for more openness about, this mystery and looking into it. And now I think they're having their day.
But a science advisor to the president making a statement is one thing, but I'm referring to the CIA or the Navy or the Air Force. Or anybody that is supposedly in possession of this knowledge, this compartmentalized knowledge, and nobody knows the whole story, right? We've all heard this. You know that as well. Why haven't they come out and said definitively that I think the public could handle it either way? It would suck if we were alone in this universe, or that we haven't been contacted, or that they didn't know. That that would bum me out. But
yeah, that would suck.
Yeah, that would suck. But why not come out and say it instead of alluding to? And it seems to me that Elizondo and Mellon and others are alluding to they are getting the information on the reality of UFOs to us that they know, right? And they're going to get it to us. That is their mission, to get the reality of UFOs and technology and crash retrievals and metamaterials out to the public, that they know exactly what's going on. They're alluding to it without actually saying yes. And that's
I wouldn't agree with that, actually. I don't know that they're alluding to that they have more information than we have. At least some of them are. I don't know that Chris Mellon has ever made statements to that effect. Elizondo has, but he has said there's a lot I don't know, but here are some things I believe I do know. I even pushed him on that point about, the potential crashes. And I said, well, you're trying to say that's your opinion, right? That that's not something you can prove. And he surprisingly said, no, I think that's not what I'm saying. And I'm skeptical, to be honest. I don't necessarily buy that. If it was up to me, I'd say, well, then prove it, because otherwise it's just talk. And if you're gonna put up or shut up type of thing, if you think you can prove this, and prove it. Otherwise, don't talk about it. I think really, if you suspect it's out there, then you need to do the research to discover it. Otherwise, I think that others I've talked to have said they don't know. Of course, Tom DeLonge is saying he knows a bunch about a lot of stuff. But again, he's not proving any of it. It's all hearsay. And he sounds a lot like a lot of the really enthusiastic, excited people in this field who have a lot of information and have kind of connected their own dots. So I don't know if they really do know. And if they do, then they got to prove it. If they're going to talk about it, is my opinion. So,
okay. Yeah, fair enough. Let's take a break right here. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I want to thank Alejandro Rojas for coming in tonight. And listen, I'm just going to let all of you know, I've got some really bad pains in my abdomen right now, and I have to end the show now. And I would like to stay and take phone calls and rap, but I just can't. And so there you go. And I hope that I feel better tomorrow. But I'll be back tomorrow night, and I'll see everybody tomorrow night. And there you go. Okay, so Race, if you're listening, run something else. But this is the situation where I can't sit anymore in this chair. I have to head home. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camurian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vitello, Mark T. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. Syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast is only copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black of the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. You've been watching me grimace all night in pain on the bunker cam. I just can't go. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Until then, everybody be safe. Go back, Lee Taffy.